Part 1. The Cinematic Hook Hack. You ever looked at a crowd of strangers and wondered, how much of ourselves do we actually show to the world? We live our lives leaving a trail of breadcrumbs behind us. A digital footprint, a credit card swipe, a face captured on a security camera. We are constantly tracked, constantly known, constantly cataloged. But imagine, just for a moment, what it would take to completely erase your existence. To step outside of your own life, out of your own name, and simply vanish into thin air. There is a strange, dark romance to the idea of becoming a ghost by choice. It requires a quiet kind of genius, or perhaps a desperate kind of madness, to plan an exit so perfect that the world is left holding nothing but questions for over half a century. Let us travel back in time. The date is November 24, 1971. The place is Portland, Oregon. It is the day before Thanksgiving, a holiday typically filled with warmth, family, and gratitude. But outside, the weather is anything but welcoming. The sky is a heavy, dark gray, blanketed by thick clouds that seem to press down on the city. A cold, relentless rain is falling, blurring the lights of the airport runways into long, glowing streaks on the wet tarmac, the runway surface. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere is loud and chaotic. People are rushing, carrying heavy luggage, eager to catch their flights to see loved ones. They are wrapped in thick coats, their minds filled with the mundane, the ordinary and routine thoughts of holiday travel. But amidst the sea of frantic travelers, there is one man who does not seem to be in a hurry. He walks slowly, deliberately, carrying only a small briefcase. He looks entirely ordinary. He is the kind of man you would pass in the corridor and forget 3 seconds later. He is invisible precisely because he looks like everyone else. He steps up to the counter of Northwest Orient Airlines. He looks the ticket agent in the eye, speaks in a calm, low voice, and buys a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington. The flight is short, less than an hour. When asked for his name, he does not hesitate. He gives a name that would soon be written into the history books of crime, a name that would puzzle the world's greatest detectives for decades. He says his name is Dan Cooper. Part 2. The boarding Dan Cooper walks down the jet bridge and steps onto Northwest Orient Flight 305, a Boeing 727 aircraft. He finds his seat at the very back of the plane, seat 18C. He sits down, places his briefcase on the floor, and takes off his dark raincoat. Underneath, he is wearing a dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a thin black clip-on tie. It is the uniform of a businessman from that era. He looks respectable, secure, safe. As the other passengers struggle with their bags and complain about the weather, Cooper remains perfectly still. His expression is unreadable. He watches the world through a pair of dark sunglasses, which he keeps on even though the sky outside is dark and gloomy. When the flight attendant, a young woman named Florence Schaffner, walks past his row, Cooper catches her eye. His voice is gentle, almost polite. He orders a drink, a bourbon and soda. He pays for it with a $20 bill, and when she tries to give him his change, he tells her to keep it. There is an eerie, a strange and frightening calmness about him. He does not sweat. His hands do not shake. He looks like a man who is simply going on a standard business trip, perhaps thinking about a meeting or a presentation. But appearances can be highly deceptive. They can easily trick us into believing something that is not true. The plane lifts off from the Portland runway, pushing its way through the heavy rain and into the turbulent, bumpy night sky. The engines roar, a steady, deep vibration that fills the cabin. For most of the passengers, this is just a minor delay on their journey home. They do not know that they are sitting inside a trap. They do not know that the polite, quiet gentleman in the black suit in seat 18C is about to execute one of the most daring, mysterious crimes in human history. A few minutes into the flight, Cooper leans forward. He flags down Florence Schaffner as she walks by. He hands her a small, folded note. Now, Florence is a professional flight attendant. In 1971, it was common for lonely businessmen to write their phone numbers on pieces of paper and hand them to the crew. She assumes this is just another instance of an unwanted romantic advance. She smiles politely, takes the note, and drops it into her pocket without reading it. Cooper notices this. He leans closer to her, his face completely serious, his eyes hidden behind those dark lenses. He whispers, "Miss, you had better look at that note. I have a bomb." Part 3. Language Anchor 1. The Storyteller's Notebook. Let us pause our journey into the dark, rainy skies of 1971 for just a moment. As a student of the English language, you know that the way we describe a scene shapes the way we feel about it. In this first chapter, we used 3 advanced words that are beautiful tools for storytelling. Let us examine them together in our storyteller's notebook. Our first word today is unassuming. When I described Dan Cooper walking through the crowded airport, I said he looked unassuming. This word is an adjective. It means modest, quiet, or not drawing any attention to oneself. Someone who is unassuming does not try to look rich, powerful, or important. They blend into the background. Think of it this way. Imagine you go to a library and you see a man wearing an old, simple sweater, quietly reading a book in the corner. You might think he is just a regular citizen. But later you find out he is actually a world-famous scientist who just won a major prize. You could say, despite his incredible fame, the scientist was remarkably unassuming in his daily life. Our second word is demeanor. We talked about Cooper's calm demeanor while he sat on the airplane, ordering a drink and paying the flight attendant. Demeanor is a noun. It refers to a person's outward behavior, their appearance, or the way they carry themselves. It is how other people perceive your emotional state based on your actions and body language. For example, think about a job interview. You might be terrified on the inside. Your heart might be beating fast, and your stomach might be tied in knots. But on the outside, you sit up straight, you smile, and you answer questions clearly. A manager might say about you later, "I loved her professional demeanor during the interview. She seemed completely confident." Dan Cooper's demeanor was his greatest weapon. It allowed him to control the situation without firing a single shot. Our final word for this segment is ransom. Though we have not yet reached the part of the story where Cooper demands it, this word is central to his mystery. A ransom is a noun. It is a sum of money, or sometimes a valuable object, that is demanded by a criminal in exchange for releasing someone they have captured. You often hear this word in movies or news stories about kidnappings or high-stakes thefts. For instance, if a famous painting is stolen from a museum, The thieves might send a letter asking for millions of dollars to return it safely. You would say, the museum refused to pay the ransom, choosing instead to let the police search for the stolen masterpiece. Keep these three words in your mind: unassuming, demeanor, and ransom. They are the building blocks of suspense, and they will help us understand the strange psychological game Dan Cooper was about to play. Let us step back onto Flight 305. The note has been handed over, the warning has been spoken, and the mystery is about to begin. Part 4. The note in the demand. The note was written in neat, all capital letters. Florence Schaffner sat down next to the quiet passenger in seat 18C, her heart pounding against her ribs as she read the words. Cooper leaned slightly toward her, opening his briefcase just enough for her to catch a glimpse of the contents. Inside, she saw rows of red cylinders, columns that looked like dynamite, connected by a maze of wires, and a large, heavy battery. He was not yelling. He was not threatening. His voice remained as smooth and comforting as the bourbon he had been sipping just moments before. He calmly requested that she write down exactly what he said. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency, meaning easily spendable $20 bills. He also demanded 4 parachutes, 2 main parachutes, and 2 backup ones. And finally, he wanted a fuel truck standing by in Seattle, ready to refuel the plane the exact moment it touched down. While the other passengers were laughing, reading magazines, or drifting off to sleep, a quiet hostage situation was unfolding at the back of the cabin. Schaffner walked quickly to the cockpit to deliver the demands to Captain William Scott. By the time the pilot received the message, the airline's management had already contacted the FBI. The decision was made to cooperate. No one wanted to risk the lives of the 36 passengers on board over money. For the next several hours, Flight 305 circled the skies above Seattle, waiting for the authorities to gather the cash and the parachutes. Up in the air, the atmosphere remained strangely peaceful. Cooper sat quietly in his seat. He put his dark sunglasses back on. He even ordered a second drink, always polite, always soft-spoken. When the plane finally landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, it was already dark. The rain was still pouring down, drumming heavily against the metal skin of the aircraft. Cooper ordered the pilot to taxi, to move the plane slowly along the ground to a bright, isolated section of the runway. He demanded that all cabin lights be turned off so that police snipers outside could not see into the windows. The exchange was remarkably smooth. An airline official walked up to the plane and handed over a heavy canvas bag filled with the cash and the 4 parachutes. True to his word, Cooper allowed all 36 passengers and Florence Schaffner to leave the aircraft. They walked down the stairs into the cold night, completely unaware of how close they had been to disaster. But Cooper was not done. He ordered the remaining crew, the pilot, the co-pilot, a flight engineer, and a second flight attendant named Tina Mucklow to stay on board. He gave the pilot very specific instructions for the next leg of the journey. They were going to fly toward Reno, Nevada. He demanded that the plane fly as slow as possible, without stalling, losing lift and falling from the sky. He ordered them to stay below 10,000 feet, an incredibly low altitude for a commercial jetliner. And most importantly, he insisted that the cabin remain unpressurized. meaning the air pressure inside would match the freezing air outside. He was setting the stage for an exit that no one in the cockpit could have possibly anticipated. Part 5. Into the storm. At approximately 7:40 p.m., the Boeing 727 roared down the Seattle runway and lifted off for the second time, ascending, climbing up into a brutal winter storm. The wind was howling at over 80 miles per hour. Freezing rain and heavy snow slammed against the windshield of the cockpit. Visibility was absolutely zero. The pilots could see nothing but a wall of blackness and swirling white ice. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper ordered Tina Mucklow, the last remaining flight attendant in the cabin, to go into the cockpit with the rest of the crew and close the door. She looked at him one last time. He was standing in the aisle, wrapping the heavy canvas bag of money around his waist, securing it tightly with rope. He had already strapped 2 of the parachutes to his body. As Tina closed the cockpit door, she noticed that he looked completely focused, completely at peace with the violent storm raging just outside the aluminum walls of the plane. A few minutes later, around 8:00 p.m., a red warning light began flashing on the pilot's control panel. It indicated that the aft stairs, the staircase located at the very back, under the tail of the plane, had been unlatched. Captain Scott picked up the cabin intercom. "Mr. Cooper," he called out into the darkness of the passenger cabin. "Is there anything we can do for you?" The radio crackled. Cooper's voice came through one last time, short and definitive. "No," he replied. While the pilots were struggling to keep the aircraft steady through the extreme turbulence, Cooper was standing on the open stairs at the back of the jet. The wind was deafening, a roaring monster tearing through the open doorway. The temperature had plummeted to well below 0 degrees. The freezing rain must have felt like needles stinging his face. Imagine the scene. A man in a simple business suit, wearing loafers and dark sunglasses, standing on the edge of a steel staircase in the middle of a midnight storm. Below him lay nothing but the dense, black forests of southwestern Washington state, a wild, rugged landscape filled with towering pine trees, icy rivers, and treacherous mountains. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the pilots felt a sudden, sharp, upward motion of the plane's tail. The aircraft had suddenly lost a significant amount of weight. Cooper had jumped. He stepped off the stairs and plummeted, fell rapidly through the freezing air at over 100 miles per hour. He vanished into the shadows of the storm, leaving behind a completely empty cabin, 2 unused parachutes, a black tie left on his seat, and a mystery that would never be solved. When the plane finally landed safely in Reno, FBI agents swarmed the aircraft. They searched every row, every closet, every square inch of the cabin. But Dan Cooper was gone. He had walked out of a moving airplane and into folklore. Part 6. Language Anchorage. Anchor 2. Grammar in the Shadows. When we look back at history, especially mysteries like the disappearance of D.B. Cooper, we are forced to become detectives ourselves. We don't have all the facts, so we have to make guesses on the evidence when the evidence we do have. In the English language, when we want to make a logical guess or deduction about something that happened in the past, we use a very specific grammatical tool. Today, in our Storyteller's Notebook, we are going to look at past modals of deduction, must have and could have, followed by the third form of the verb. the past participle. Let us start with must have plus the past participle. We use this structure when we are almost entirely certain that something happened in the past, because the evidence points directly to that conclusion. It is a tool for logical certainty. For example, when the FBI searched the area where they believed Cooper jumped, they found absolutely no trace of his body, his parachute, or the money. Because of the freezing temperatures and the violent wind, many survival experts looked at the situation and said, Cooper must have died during the jump. They used must have died because, in their professional opinion, it was biologically impossible for a man in a business suit to survive a fall into a freezing mountain forest. Now let us look at the second structure, could have plus the past participle. We use could have when we are talking about a past possibility. We are not entirely certain it happened, but it was theoretically possible. It represents one option among many. While many experts believed he died, other investigators pointed out that Cooper seemed to have a deep knowledge of aviation and parachuting. He knew exactly which plane to hijack, how fast it should fly, and how to open the rear doors in midair. Therefore, some detectives argued he could have survived the jump if he had hidden a warmer jacket under his suit. It was a possibility. Let us practice putting these two structures together so you can see how they work in conversation. Imagine you come home from work and you notice that your favorite chocolate chip cookies are missing from the kitchen counter. You see crumbs on your little brother's shirt, and he is smiling guiltily. You can say with logical certainty, he must have eaten the cookies because there are crumbs all over his clothes. But what if there are no crumbs, and the window next to the counter is wide open? You might look outside and say, a bird could have flown through the window and taken them, or maybe Mom could have moved them to a different shelf. When we talk about D.B. Cooper, the world is still split between these two structures. Did he survive? Did he survive? He could have landed safely, walked out of the woods, and lived the rest of his life under a completely different name. Or, did the dark wilderness claim him? He must have underestimated the raw power of nature on that freezing November night. As we move forward into our next chapter, keep these structures close. We will look at the clues left behind in the mud, and you will have to decide for yourself which past deduction makes the most sense. Part 7. The Hunt and the Theories. When the sun rose on the morning of November 25, 1971, the largest manhunt in American history began. The FBI named the case Norjack, short for Northwest Hijacking. Soldiers, police officers, and federal agents moved like a human wave through the thick, wet forests of southwestern Washington state. They drove heavy vehicles through the mud. They flew helicopters low over the canopy, the thick upper layer of the trees. They used tracking dogs, sophisticated maps, and complex math to calculate exactly where a human body falling through a midnight storm would land. They found absolutely nothing. No piece of clothing, no stray piece of rope, not a single thread from a parachute. For nearly 10 years, the case remained frozen in the cold Pacific Northwest air. But then, in February of 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was on vacation with his family. They were camping on a stretch of beach along the Columbia River called Tinabar, just a few miles downstream from where investigators believed Cooper had jumped. Brian was scraping his fingers through the wet sand, preparing to build a campfire, when his hand hit something strange. It was a package. Then another. He pulled up 3 tightly bound bundles of cash, wrapped in thick rubber bands that had turned brittle and cracked with age. When the FBI examined the bills, the serial numbers matched. It was $20 bills from the ransom money. A total of $5,800. The bills were heavily degraded, rotted, and partially destroyed by water and time. This discovery did not solve the mystery. Instead, it split the world into 2 fiercely dug-in camps, 2 groups of people with completely opposite beliefs. The first theory is the tragic, pragmatic one. It argues that Dan Cooper died the very night he jumped. Proponents, defenders of this idea, say that stepping out of a jet into an 80-mile-per-hour wind at freezing temperatures is the equivalent of hitting a concrete wall. They believe he was knocked unconscious instantly, or his parachute failed to open, or he drowned in the icy, swollen waters of the Columbia River. The money found in the sand, they argue, was simply washed ashore after his body decayed in the wilderness. The second theory is the romantic one. It claims that Cooper pulled off the perfect crime. These theorists believe he survived the impact, navigated his way out of the dense forest using survival skills, and buried a portion of the money at Tina Bar years later, just to confuse the FBI and make them think he was dead. They believe he washed the rest of the bills through foreign banks, or spent them slowly over decades, living a quiet, comfortable life under a completely fabricated identity. In 2016, after 45 years of chasing ghosts, interviewing thousands of people, and filling massive warehouses with files, the FBI officially closed the active investigation. They simply ran out of answers. The file was put away, unsolved, leaving the world to wonder who the man in seat 18C really was. Part 8. The philosophical angle. But let us step away from the timelines, the serial numbers, and the forensic evidence. Let us look at something much more interesting: the human mind. Why do we care so much about a man who stole money and threatened to blow up an airplane? Objectively, Dan Cooper was a criminal. He broke the law. He endangered the lives of a flight crew, and he took money that did not belong to him. Yet, almost immediately after his jump, something strange happened in the public consciousness. He was not vilified. He was not treated as a cruel or hated villain. Instead, he became a folk hero. People wrote songs about him. They printed T-shirts with his face on them. Every year, people still gather in small towns in Washington to celebrate D.B. Cooper Days. Why do we celebrate a man who disappeared into the dark? I think it is because D.B. Cooper represents a powerful, universal human archetype, the individual who beats the system. We live in a world that is highly structured. We are bound by rules, by schedules, by taxes, by debts, and by names that carry our entire histories. We are locked into our roles in society. Sometimes, the weight of being known, the weight of constantly participating in the machine of modern life, becomes incredibly heavy. Cooper did something that many people have secretly fantasized about doing during a difficult day at work or a stressful moment in life. He walked into a rigid system, a commercial airline flight, and completely rewrote the rules. He showed a quiet, polite defiance. He did not use violence. He used intelligence, elegance, and an almost unnatural calmness. And then he did the ultimate act of rebellion. He stepped out of the machine entirely. When he jumped into that storm, he wasn't just escaping the police. He was escaping the grid. He became a symbol of absolute freedom. The freedom to discard your burdens, to erase your past mistakes, and to start over as a blank slate. We don't want D.B. Cooper to be caught. If the FBI had arrested him a week after the jump, he would just be another forgotten inmate in a federal prison. But, by vanishing, he remained infinite. He became whoever we want him to be. He is the quiet neighbor down the street who never talks about his past. He is the old man sitting at the bar, smiling into his drink. He is a mirror for our own deep desire to sometimes just disappear. Part 9. Language Anchor 3. The Idiom Detective. Idiom Detective. As we think about this grand escape, let us explore our third and final storyteller's notebook for this episode. In English, we have several colorful idioms that we use when we talk about things that are lost, hidden, or impossible to find. Let us look at 2 of them today. Our first idiom is to vanish into thin air. I used this phrase earlier to describe Cooper's leap from the aircraft. It means to disappear completely and suddenly, without leaving behind any clues, traces, or explanations. It is if the person or object did not just leave, but actually dissolved into the atmosphere around them. You can use this idiom in everyday life when something disappears in a way that feels impossible or confusing. For example, imagine you are working on your computer and you spend 3 hours writing an important essay. Suddenly, the power cuts out. When you turn the computer back on, the file is completely gone. You searched every folder, but it is nowhere to be found. You could say, "I don't understand what happened. My entire essay seems to have vanished into thin air." Our second idiom is a needle in a haystack. When the military and the FBI were searching the vast, dense forests of Washington state, they were looking for a single man and a small briefcase inside thousands of square miles of thick trees and deep valleys. This is the definition of looking for a needle in a haystack. It describes a search that is practically impossible because the area you are searching is massive and the object you are looking for is incredibly small. Think about losing something tiny in a massive space. If you are playing soccer on a huge grass field and your small gold earring falls out during the game, trying to find it after the match is a nightmare. You would walk onto the field, look at the millions of blades of grass, and say to your teammate, "We might as well stop looking. Finding my earring out here is like looking for a needle in a haystack." Both of these idioms help us visualize the sheer scale of the D.B. Cooper mystery. He managed to vanish into thin air, turning his body and his secrets into a needle in a haystack that the world is still trying to find. Part 10. The Active Challenge. Pop Quiz. Now, let us test your memory and your language skills with a brief pop quiz. I have 2 questions for you based on our journey through the Cooper mystery. Listen carefully and choose the best answer. Question number 1. Why did the FBI officially close the active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case in 2016? A. Because they found his parachute in a deep valley. B. Because they ran out of answers after 45 years of searching. C. Because a man confessed to the crime on his deathbed. Think about your answer for a moment. The correct answer is B. The FBI closed the active case because Despite an exhaustive investigation, they simply ran out of viable leads and answers. The mystery remains officially unsolved. Question number 2, focusing on our vocabulary. If a person walks into a room and behaves in a way that is quiet, modest, and does not draw any attention to their presence, how would you describe them using one of our advanced words? They have an unassuming demeanor. B, they are demanding a heavy ransom. C, they are experiencing severe turbulence. Consider the definitions we discussed. The correct answer is A. A person who is quiet and doesn't seek attention has an unassuming demeanor. If you got both of those right, congratulations. You are mastering both the history and the language of this deep mystery. We have reached the end of our journey through the storm, the sky, and the psychology of Dan Cooper. I want to thank you for joining me today on The Quiet Philosopher. In a world that moves incredibly fast, a world that demands quick answers and constant noise, you chose to slow down. You chose to sit with a mystery, to think deeply about human nature, and to learn a language mindfully, piece by piece. That is a beautiful thing. If you enjoyed our time together in the shadows of 1971, please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. It helps our quiet community. Before I leave you, I have one final question to pose, one thought for you to carry into your week. If you were a detective on this case, what do you think happened after that fateful jump? Do you think he perished in the wilderness? Or do you think he succeeded in creating a new life? I want you to leave a comment with your theory, but here is your challenge. Try to use at least one new vocabulary word or idiom from today's episode in your response. Show me your unassuming demeanor, or tell me if you think the truth is just a needle in a haystack. Until next time, keep your mind open, keep your thoughts deep, and remember, sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones we keep inside ourselves. Goodbye for now.